My name is Wayne Beaton. I'm the Director of Open Source Projects at the Eclipse Foundation. My job, as I see it, is to help our committers and our open source projects be successful. Now that takes a number of different forms. We have a team that does open source project governance, and that basically is implementing the Eclipse Foundation development process. We have a team that does intellectual property due diligence, and I'll talk, that's mostly what this talk is about. And we have some people, and apparently we have laptops that shut themselves down. Are we back? All right. Yeah, so we work with trademarks. The Eclipse Foundation holds trademarks on behalf of the open source projects and working groups. My team manages that sort of thing. I am not a lawyer. I do not play a lawyer on TV. I have no lawyers in my family. Anything that I say should not be regarded as legal advice. Listen to me at your peril. Intellectual property, basically works of the mind. Anything that you create is intellectual property. If you write a story, if you write code, if you draw a picture, that is something that would be considered intellectual property. Generally, we talk about intellectual properties having a copyright, an owner of that content, and in order to make something available for others to use, we talk about licensing that content. Very often, licensing in a traditional context, licensing is you pay some money and somebody lets you use that content. In an open source context, we have open source licenses which give people various rights and responsibilities with regard to how they use the code and the content. So I just want to make this clear. The Eclipse Foundation development, our due diligence process for intellectual property does not eliminate risk. There is no such thing as eliminating risk. What we do is we try to mitigate risk. Our due diligence process is about discovering licenses in content, making that information available to the downstream, and as much as possible, and this is a particularly tricky piece, determining whether or not licenses in their combination are compatible with one another. And I'm going to watch the lawyers as I say this because I'm expecting them to nod. This is actually a really hard problem. No? Yeah? Okay. So again, we see this as us identifying the licenses to the best of our ability. Ultimately, it's the people who are taking this content and incorporating it into their products that are taking the risk, right? So there's some amount of due diligence required based on, I guess, the values of the entity that's consuming this content and leveraging it. They bear some responsibility to do some of their own due diligence, at least some. Again, we try to prepare them, prepare as much as we can, people to consume our content as safely as possible. But again, there's no such thing as eliminating risk. We started doing this some time ago, 2004 or so. Our first intellectual property due diligence processes came into effect. At that time, 100% serial, all content needed to be reviewed before it could be used. In an Eclipse project, we did very deep dives on all content. So we would dig into the provenance of transient dependencies and third-party stuff, and it was, again, very, very thorough, using fingerprinting and all sorts of other code checks to provide as complete a picture as possible. We did so very much, and the problem, or part of our problem with that is it just took a very, very long time. And honestly, we found stuff, but not a lot, and the industry basically stop caring isn't quite the right word, but the level of depth that we went to was a little bit too far. So we started updating it by introducing some parallelization so that we could have development teams using content before we finished our reviews. 2016, we made the provenance scans optional, so we wouldn't do quite as deep a dive on the content, focused more on licenses. At that point, we were adopting SPDX identifiers and expressions. In 2019, we switched to a license check only model. Again, this is observing what the industry valued and responding to that. 2022, we went 100% parallel. We introduced significant automation into the process and focused 100% on license compatibility. Now, again, I said earlier, license compatibility is actually a hard problem, but our focus is making sure that we believe generally that the licenses being used by projects for their content are generally compatible. Again, different lawyers are going to tell you different things, and ultimately none of this, we don't really know anything until stuff is proven in court. Looking for nods. Okay. All right. What we're looking for the future is hitting an 80% plus automation. We're actually floating around 80% of our IP due diligence is 80%. So we're pretty much there at this point. Dealing with SPDX SBOMs, Cyclone DX SBOMs, we're actually kind of looking more at a little more heavily at the Cyclone DX for a couple of reasons. And of course, we're focusing some attention on figuring out what we're doing about AI and generated content. I'll try to get to that as best I can. Our due diligence overhaul over the last couple of years, those of you that have been around for a little while may remember IPzilla. We killed that with prejudice sometime last year. I would very much like you to please stop using the term CQ, as it causes duress and throws me into hysterics. Very, very bad memories. Anyway, so we retired IPzilla, and we now have something called IP Lab, which is a GitLab-based implementation. It's an entirely standard GitLab. IPzilla was a heavily modified version of Bugzilla, which was problematic for a number of reasons, and I'm going to stop talking about it now. Anyway, yeah, so with the Dash license tool, projects have realized, again, those of you that have been around for a little while and remember how we used to do things with the Dash license tool, it is so much easier now to engage with the IP team and automate much of the process of doing the due diligence on third-party content. Okay, I'm good? All right. Let's make sure that gets on the recording. Anyway, so we've found significant improvements with the automation. Like I said, we're hovering at about 80% hit in general on doing automation, which leaves our IP team time to really focus on the remaining 20%, and they've freed them up to actually work more with upstream, to work with the actual project teams that are producing the third-party content that we're leveraging, to help them improve their intellectual property or their license reporting. Okay, contribution. So this is just more for the committers and the people who want to be committers. Just source code is considered core content, and source code needs to be authored using the repositories that are provided and managed by the Eclipse Foundation IT team. I don't think this is controversial, but every once in a while we find project teams that are confused by this. What we would certainly like very much to avoid is a situation where teams are working in some corporate clone of a Git repository and periodically throwing stuff over the wall to the Eclipse project. While we can probably argue that this would meet the open source definition in terms of licensing and distribution, it very much would be a violation of the Eclipse Foundation development process. The Eclipse Foundation development process describes how we develop software. Again, if as I made this comment yesterday, if you're ever in a meeting with me, I say the words open, transparent, and meritocratic a lot in meetings, right? So this is why we want project teams working in the assigned public repository, because this gives people the best opportunity to collaborate with you, right? Having access to the most recent code, being able to make contributions based on the current code base are fundamental to operating in an open and transparent manner, and giving people an opportunity to develop meritocracy enough to join your project, grow your diversity, ultimately the success of your open source project.
I guess you can make quickly fork, right? Every time.
Never fork. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so the GitHub, yes, the GitHub process of you make a fork, you do some work, and then you do a pull request, absolutely. Just, we don't want the whole team making a fork, working in the fork, and then throwing stuff back every once in a while, because then nobody outside of that team has a chance of participating.
Normally, that's what they always say to me. Actually, then I need a fork.
Absolutely. An individual fork to do some individual work, great. Exactly. That's just how we work. That's the model of how we do this. When more than when your whole project team is working in that fork, that's the problem, right? Or your little inner circle of colleagues kind of doing, again, that would be something we would refer to as vendor domination, and we try to make things vendor neutral, right? We want to make sure that other people can participate. And again, GitHub, GitLab, making forks, doing pull or merge requests is just how we work. We do have some requirements. Again, the committers have experienced this. Those of you that have made contributions have experienced this. In order to make contributions, we require that contributors sign our Eclipse contributor agreement. This, among other things, includes a copy of the DCO, which I will talk about in a minute. The important parts are that the author of in the commit record should, that email address needs to match the email address that the contributor has uses for their Eclipse Foundation account. This would match the email address that they used to sign an ECA. Those of you that haven't done this, the ECA is an electronic form that, again, you attest to a number of things, sign electronically. We keep a copy in our database. And we have hooks on all of our Git repositories that check for the existence of the ECA when somebody makes a pull request. Is anybody using our GitLab instance? Yeah? Cool, okay, good. So again, the contributors must digitally sign the ECA. The ECA wraps the Linux Foundation's DCO, Developer Certificate of Origin. Basically, by signing the ECA, you are attesting that you wrote the code or basically have the necessary rights to contribute the code under the terms of the project license. And what else have we got? Your contributions are public, because right, so basically you're attesting that you haven't stolen this code from somebody, or again, that you have the necessary rights to make that contribution.
Wait, I guess you will touch on that later when it comes to generative AI, right? Because I guess this is the key question.
This is part of the key question, yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. Just a reminder, I am still not a lawyer. Anything that I say, it should not be taken as legal advice. Please do not say in conversation, but Wayne said. So we have a number of agreements in place, and actually, who read the committer agreement? Really? Huh? Cool. Yeah, you're lying. So we have a couple of different forms. So the committer agreements, some of you would have signed your own committer agreements. Some of you would fall under a blanket committer agreement. So we have something called the member committer and contributor agreement. And this is something that our member companies will sign, which basically allows all of covers all of their employees when they become committers. People who are not able to be covered by one of those would sign an individual contributor agreement. So again, these two agreements, just different, they basically say the same thing. One of them is corporate, one of them is individual. They attest things like you, as a committer, agree to follow the policies of the Eclipse Foundation, including the Eclipse Foundation development process and the IP policy, and various other policies that we have. Who is aware of the IP policy? Has anyone read the IP policy? Okay, yeah, okay. Cruel and unusual punishment. Anyway, we also again have the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. The Eclipse Contributor Agreement that I just described is contained in the committer agreements as well. So by signing the committer agreement or being covered by a committer agreement, you are also covered by the DCO and the ECA. That again, these are just sort of the legal agreements that you have in place that state that you agree to work as under the requirements that of being an Eclipse committer, and that your contributions are made under the terms of the license, and again all of those things. Just make sure that we have agreements in place to make sure that the content that we are producing we're mitigating the risk that content. Mitigating the risk that adopters will receive content that may be under. Anyway, sorry, I'm just going to stop. It mitigates the risk. Question.
Yeah, so technically, at least, this would mean that when my company has a member committer and contributor agreement, that none of the employees would need to sign the contributor agreement.
That is absolutely true.
But there are no checks in place that if the email address something like that, then you don't need to sign.
So if you are not a committer, so once you become a committer, our system just knows who you are, and you're fine. If you are an employee of a member company but are not a committer, if you go into our accounts.eclipse.org, go to your account settings, and set your employer to the member company, then the ECA checker will know who you are. It's actually not wrong to sign the ECA, you just don't need to. I know that some organizations don't let their employees sign agreements. So, but you do have to tell us who you work for. We don't do, maybe, and there's an argument that we probably should, but we don't do automatic email address matching against accounts. I'm going to open up an issue for that, though.
Just out of interest, can anybody basically claim to work for anybody?
So theoretically, but there is actually a person behind it. So we do actually check, and there is a means by which organizations can confirm the list of people who claim to be their employee. So I didn't really know how to draw this picture, so I drew a bad one. Both of the people in this picture are not lawyers. Yeah, that joke's just hilarious. Anyway, okay. So we use something called symmetrical licensing. The idea is, as a content producer, you are creating your content and you are contributing it to an open source project at the Eclipse Foundation under the terms of the project license. So the license that you're contributing into the project under is the project license. The Eclipse Foundation then has the necessary rights to then also distribute that content under the same license, right? So if you contribute content to a project that's under the EPL 2.0, you're contributing content under those license terms and are giving us permission basically to distribute them under those terms. One of the things that's, I'm not sure if it's unique to us, I don't know, it's certainly not unique, but contributors retain the copyright. So when you come to us and you give us content, you own that content. You're just giving us a license to use that content, and then we in turn give others that same license to use that content. Does that make sense? So there's some implications of that. Like, for one thing, we cannot take that content then and relicense it. There are some legal things with copyright that we can package the content and or include the content and other things and distribute it in different ways. But the content that you produce is your content, right? So again, if we wanted to change the license of a project, we would need all of the content, all the copyright holders to agree to that. Now, one thing about copyright is it may not be you in terms of the copyright holder. The copyright holder may well be, depending on the nature of your employment contract, may well be your employer. Or it could be somebody else. If you're a consultant, very often you give the rights to whoever you are working for. Yes?
When the Eclipse platform or others transitioned from EPL 1 to EPL 2, did you ask everybody, or was this? So
the EPL, and this is common in a lot of licenses, the EPL has a clause in it which says that we can, anybody, or a contributor, anyway, the license basically says that you can update to the next version of the license. The word contributor is defined in a strange way in the EPL, which always kind of confuses me. Yeah.
You mentioned that strictly speaking, you would have to ask consent from the copyright holder, which might be my employer.
Might be, yes.
I have never experienced, I have gotten several of such requests to agree to a change in licensing. And in most, or if not all of these cases, it was based on code that I contributed as part of my employment. Meaning, in theory, or formally speaking, this mail shouldn't have reached me, but my employer really.
Well, as the agent working on behalf of your employer, we would look to you to make sure that you have the necessary permission to...
I have no clue whether I have that. How would
I would check with your manager. Sorry, then you're getting into internal company politics, and every company is different. Some companies would enable their employees to make those decisions. Some people would require the lab director's oppression.
Don't tell policy.
Well, at your peril, you know that.
We are always aware that not all companies require. It's a default setting, but employees can demand that their contribution or their own computer that could be in their job description. So there's no one size fits all solution to that. So you must rely on who claims to be copyright holder, whether you or your company. It's nothing that any third party can decide for you.
We have, and I almost hate to bring this up, but we actually have some people who have two identities with the Eclipse Foundation. They have their employment identity, and then they have an individual identity. And so they're covered by an MCCA, member agreement, under one identity, but then they have an ICA, an individual committer agreement, right? Which is weird. So far, I don't think we have any projects that have the same person as a committer twice, but it's technically possible. Yeah. Well, yeah, because then you need two entirely separate identities. You would have to have two separate GitHub identities. Our system doesn't support that in a first-class way, which is why I hesitate to bring it up, because there's all kinds of weirdness around it. Anyway, I'm going to quickly go through this because I think you all, many of you have experienced this already. Again, still not a lawyer. The Dash License tool is a tool that we created. Actually, I'll be honest, it was created as an interim solution to help committers understand or deal with what is a fairly complex way of determining the license of content. And anyway, we created it, and it turns out people like it, and it's got a lot of momentum, and it's been pretty interesting. Anyway, there's a Maven plugin. You can use the Maven plugin to scan your dependencies. I just want to I'm bringing this up because I just want to make sure you understand that the Dash License tool doesn't do any magic. It just knows what Maven knows. So when you use the Maven plugin, the Maven reactor says, here are the things that you have in your dependency list. And then Dash License tool checks those things. It doesn't dig into anything in particular. So if you've got funky things in your build, it may not help you. At this point, I should also just remind everybody that tools are only so good. Again, if your builds are doing funky things, the standard tools we're probably not going to be able to help you understand the nature, and we may have to actually dig in deeper. There's projects that grab jar files off of Maven Central, pull them apart, grab a couple of classes, drop them into the file, right? The Maven reactor has no idea that that's happening. So those are kinds of things that we would need to actually augment the work that this tool is capable of doing to help discover and track. And this is why we depend on committers to understand what they're doing in their builds. The license tool can be invoked on arbitrary content. You can just give it an ID. You can give it a Maven Gav. You can give it a, we use clearly defined for various reasons. You can give it a package URL. You can give it all sorts of things, and it'll kind of figure out what that thing is and try to figure out the license for you. It uses a combination. We use the clearly defined database with caution, and we have our own internal database that this checks against. Again, just another quick example. With Python, you can use the dependencies, or sorry, requirements.txt file, just run that through the tool. The requirements.txt file in Python is generated, contains just your dependencies. Anyway, got the page, the website for the Dash license tool has all sorts of examples of how to use it with different technologies, but again, it doesn't know anything about Python. It doesn't know anything about Java. All it knows is you've given it these identifiers for content, and I'll go and try and figure out what the license is based on that identifier. It does have a way, and this was, I'm really proud of this one, actually. This one, I thought this was really cool. When it identifies content that it doesn't know the license for, it will open up a request for our IP team to look at it. So it basically creates an issue on IP Lab, if you ask it to. I've limited it to only open up 100 issues at most, because we don't like being buried. In the beginning, we got buried like every day. As the database is filled in, it happens less and less. But yeah, the IP team had our queue down to 12, which is unheard of. And then the next day, it was like 150. Yeah, there you go.
First of all, thank you very much. I think it is a very useful tool. It's helping us a lot. But one question, because we run this tool and we got like, everything was fine, but we had like 5 that were not identified. These 5 components were actually the libraries that we were building ourselves. Mm-hmm. So how we should deal with this? Do we need to open a ticket, or as we are already building them under a specific license? Yep. Does it mean that it's actually...
So again, the tool only knows what you tell it. We have, there's some heuristics on the back end that try to figure out if something is Eclipse content, and then based on that, it just basically gets the license information for that content. We tweak that heuristic every once in a while it's conservative, right? I'd rather it not misidentify third-party content as Eclipse content, so sometimes it does a bad job. So the easiest thing would be to open up an issue against help desk or against the license tool itself, and we'll tweak it to see if it'll understand, make it understand what how to differentiate your project content from third party. The other thing is just tell it to ignore, right? So you can actually tell the Maven plugin, ignore these group IDs. You can tell, the Python example, we're basically just piping content into the tool, so you could filter, use a grep filter on the content that you pipe in to say don't ask about this kind of stuff. So there's tricks that you can use for that. Again, the tool only does what you ask it to do. Anyway, does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Open up an issue. I do try to be responsive. We actually starting to develop a small team around the project, so we're getting more capacity, so it's not just me. The back end, so basically the back end, we have a process that periodically scans goes and look at IP Lab to see what's there, and based on what it finds there, it determines tries to figure out where the source code is. And it finds the source code. When it finds the source code, it downloads it, extracts it, runs scan code toolkit on it, and analyzes the results. And then based on what it sees, generally if there's one license and it's, uh-oh. There we go, pardon me. So it'll approve content. Again, about 80% of the time it approves content all by itself. Otherwise, it'll flag it for review by the IP team. This tool, we're continually tweaking this. People keep finding new kinds of ways to find content, so we try to figure out, we have to find different ways to figure out the ways to find the source for that content. But we support Cargo, PyPy, certainly Maven Central, Maven Repository, a bunch of other sources of Maven information. A lot of, most of the technologies, NPM, of course, Yarn, so we know how to find sources in all sorts of places. In cases where the metadata specifies a repository, but doesn't specify a source, we actually will we'll find it on GitHub. It does again, it's I'm pretty happy with the way that this is able to find source. Right, I'm going to power through here because I'm running out of time. We've identified that using clearly defined coordinates is, while it was a good idea at the time, it turns out to have been a terrible idea. So we're going to be looking at using package URL, just as it is more concisely or more precisely describes content. As part of this, we're going to have to figure out how to describe a package URL for plugin content. So that's something we're working on. If you've been listening to me talk on our committer, anyone actually been attending our committer office hours? We have committer office hours once a month. I send out a note on the committer channel a couple of days ahead of each one of them. Please attend those. Those are, we're trying to make those a source of information for you, but we've been talking an awful lot about SBOMs. We are looking at using automatic tools to build SBOMs. The thing that we're looking for projects right now to do is to just please make sure your metadata is correct. Most of these tools that we have today that are available are fantastic, but they only work as good as the data that they're provided with. So specifying your metadata as, again, completely as possible is really helpful. If you look at things like Maven metadata, when you specify multiple licenses, it's not entirely clear how these licenses are combined. That information does manifest in the Maven Central UI, which is cool. But if you specify the license as an SPDX expression, we have a much better chance of understanding how the licenses are actually combined. So, and this, if you look at the Maven documentation, they're all over this. They think this is cool too. So again, that's the ask right now. Please, as you're going through your projects, please make sure that the metadata that you're providing for your content is complete. And if you're not sure what that complete means, attend the office hours. We'll help you with that. Yeah, and then to actually generate the SBOM for Maven-based builds, pretty straightforward. The Cyclone DX, a Maven plugin, just generates an SBOM. That SBOM winds up getting propagated up to Maven Central along with the rest of your content. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Doesn't really add very much to your build, a couple of seconds maybe to your build. All right, I'm running close to the end. I think I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Again, while I have watched a number of legal dramas, I am not a lawyer. So using generated content is something we've been really focused on. First and foremost, our mindset right now internal to the foundation is that these technologies exist today, they are our reality, and we have to figure out a way to live with them. One of the things I'm really curious about is if you are aware of corporate policies that your own companies are developing that would prevent you from using open source that contains generated content, I'd really like to know about that. But again, our mindset right now is that developers benefit from this. It's basically a force for good. It's the reality, and we want to figure out how we can allow committers to use it. Today, we don't. Today, we ask our committers to please not use code generation. There's a couple of different issues, and this is way longer discussion than we have time for today. This is at least an entire talk, and of course, I am not a lawyer. One of the challenges with this is generated content doesn't, as I understand it, legal consensus is generated content is not copyrightable. Therefore, it can't be licensed. I believe that means you put it like a CC0 on it, a public domain license. Okay, the lawyers are doing this, right? See, again, not a lawyer, they are lawyers. There is some discussion about whether or not generated content is actually could be considered a derivative work. The idea being that these code generators don't actually copy anything. They find patterns, and then they apply patterns. And in the process of applying patterns, they may coincidentally create something that already exists. And whether or not that is a derivative, again, we don't know yet. So that's something that far smarter legal minds than I am are discussing, and we're paying very, very close attention to it. So again, if it's not clear whether something is a derivative work, it's not clear whether whether you're violating licenses if something is suspiciously close to something else. The lawyers are squirming right now. And then what do we do about this with Eclipse projects? Again, our strong preference is that Eclipse projects will be able to use this, and we are just trying to figure out what the parameters are. One of the things that I have noticed, and I'm going to look at the lawyers while I say this, I looked at the ChatGPT terms of use, and there is this requirement, or this requirement is you cannot use ChatGPT to build a competitor to ChatGPT. Which means, as far as I can tell, that means you can't use ChatGPT to build open source. Yeah, see, this is the part I was looking for. Yeah, see? I'm causing him pain. If you haven't heard of the monkey picture, anyway, if you haven't heard of the monkey picture case, fascinating, go look it up. Monkey selfie case. Yeah, the picture, yeah, I didn't put an attribution, not copyrightable.
You're a lawyer, right?
Oh, I learned that from Wikipedia. Anyway, yeah, that was meant to be fun. Yeah, okay, never mind. Good. Again, I mentioned that I am not a lawyer. That's all I have for today. I think that's the end of my time. Happy to answer questions. I'll be down at the Eclipse Foundation booth most of the rest of the day. If you have other questions, things you want to discuss, please come and see me. Yes, Kai.
Just one final question for me to really understand it correctly. Right now, at this moment, you discourage or even prohibit using generated code in any of my commits?
Yes.
Okay.
Please don't use it today.
I think there hasn't been any clear communication about this yet, and I would appreciate it if you could.
Yes. Okay, yes. Yes, I agree.
Because I can't tell anybody in my organization to not do that, but I get these questions constantly. People, to my knowledge, are already doing that.
We assume that that's the case too. Anyway, so hopefully we'll have better news soon. We are working with our IP Advisory Committee to try to understand what our options are. Anyway, thank you so much. I look forward to